friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to episode 32 of the MC Lars podcast. Today's episode is with Greg Carlisle. It is Monday, April 8th, and we are on tour in the UK. Cuckoo Kangaroo, Mega Ran, Ruled by Raptors, and myself. We had the day off today, and we're staying on a small coastal village on the northern eastern coast of Scotland. I've never been up here. We always just drive straight through the motorway up to Scotland. So it's kind of cool to take a detour. We played Newcastle, so we had time to stop, and it's been awesome. We are in Glasgow tomorrow, then the 10th Huddersfield, then Nottingham, then we end the tour on Saturday, April 13th in London. Then we go to the Midwest, April 30th, Fargo, May 1st, Minneapolis. Then we do Milwaukee, Chicago, Pontiac, Cleveland, Rochester, Columbus, Pittsburgh, Nashville, Birmingham, Charlotte, Atlanta, Gainesville, West Palm Beach, Orlando. And then I play on June 8th, Boston with my original band, opening for Big D and the Kids Table. Then that's it for a while. I'm kind of taking a break from touring. So this is the last time you might be able to see me for a while. And that's cool, though. It makes these shows super exciting. It's a momentous 10-year of my second album, an album that I didn't ever think I would finish. You know, made that album during a period of transition, and really proud of Robot Kills. So today we're talking to Greg Carlisle. He's a teacher, a writer, an academic, a blogger, an interesting guy who teaches at Morehead State University in Morehead, Kentucky. And 2 weeks ago, I opened for MC Chris at the Lexington, Kentucky Comic-Con after party. And I rented a car and I drove an hour east to hang out with Greg. And it was awesome. Like, I'd read his book, Elegant Complexity, along with Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. And let me tell you a background about Greg. He got his Master in Fine Arts from the University of Louisville. He teaches theater and drama at Morehead State, and he's one of the old school faculty members who's been there the longest. He said he's been there about 20 years. I really like his laugh, because every time in the interview, he says something profound or like sad or dramatic about Infinite Jest, he laughs, which kind of punctuated the interview well. So he's got a great laugh, and he's a really sweet guy. Like, I emailed him out of the blue, and I sent him my TED Talk, said, I'd heard him on other podcasts. I told him I was a fan of his story, his analysis of Infinite Jest, and he agreed to meet with me. So he wrote this book because when Ulysses came out, the Bloomsday book was a cool way to help read Ulysses. So he wanted to provide something similar for Infinite Jest. And I think one of the best online analyses of Infinite Jest is Aaron Swartz. Google Aaron Swartz Infinite Jest. He was the co-founder of Reddit, who got in trouble for sharing all the academic journals from Harvard. And he committed suicide without leaving a note. And an interesting, sad guy, a Stanford kid. I didn't know him, but I think we were there around a few years apart from each other. Anyway, Aaron Swartz has a great analysis of the end of Infinite Jest. But it's crazy because Infinite Jest is about this illegal cartridge that, if you watch, leaves you in stasis, and then you starve to death and defecate yourself and can't move. And Aaron Swartz got in trouble, huge trouble for sharing these illegal, like, academic journals. And just like the dad in Infinite Jest died mysteriously, so did Aaron. So it's kind of weird how life imitates literature. But listening to this podcast, it struck me that it's like, if you don't know the plot of Infinite Jest, it's going to be like we're speaking German or Italian, because there's like hundreds of characters. There's all this jargon. I was listening while I was editing, like I was cleaning my room and listening. I was like, I could follow it, but I was like, I could see how this is very confusing. So here's what I want you to do. Before you listen, pause this, go on Wikipedia, read the plot summary. And I want to warn you that in talking about the book, we give away a lot of the plot, but the plot is so gigantic and confusing. It's actually nice to know what happens. And then go to TV Tropes. That's a cool site that summarizes things. And there's a great Infinite Jest page. The entertainment is this device. It's the MacGuffin, right? A MacGuffin is something that drives a plot. It's this cartridge that if you watch, you die. And I wanted to focus on the movement of this piece of technology throughout the book because it kind of drives the plot. Everything else gets kind of confusing, but if you can focus on this part of the story, it's nice. And it was really cool to kind of volley intellectually back and forth with Greg Carlisle about these topics because I've been in a vacuum reading this book. And yes, I did some Patreon songs about it, but I kind of feel like I've been on my own. And I think that this is interesting because understanding this book is like, people talk about how the humanities are not useful, and there's a lot of emphasis on STEM education, and all that's great. It's super important, but to be able to talk about a book like this and understand the emotional depth and the literary context and everything, I don't know. It kind of gave me a lot of like insight on how I've been feeling these days, how the world seems, like what social media has done to the planet, how the Facebook is basically like the MacGuffin of the entertainment. And so, yeah, shout out to the humanities professors everywhere. Shout out to people getting their MFAs. Shout out to, people doing the non-practical thing. So we could do podcasts and play Comic-Con after parties. Right on. We're going to end with the Jabberwocky song from Dewey Decibel, which premiered on Spotify 2 Fridays ago. This song I really like because just as David Foster Wallace made up some words, Lewis Carroll's famous for making up lots of language. And one of the obscure words that David Foster Wallace helped popularize is phantods, which is a state of nervous excitement. And he talks about how when Oren, who's the athlete older brother in Infinite Jest, when he sees cockroaches, when he's living in Arizona, he gets the howling phantods. And that's actually the name of an Infinite Jest fan page. So just like Wallace popularized new words, so did Lewis Carroll. So this is my interview with Greg Carlisle. Before we get into this, I want to give a shout out to some of the new Patreon supporters, Jeff, RJ, and AJB. Thank you. Big shout out to some old Patreon supporters, Alex, Eli, and Dylan. If you want to check out more musical flavor, go to patreon.com/MCLars. And anyway, let's get into it. This is my interview with the legendary literary critic, theater teacher, Greg Carlisle. Check 1 2, check.
Check 1 2, check.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am here with Greg Carlisle, teacher, author, academic here at Morehead State University. And you're one of the OG faculty here, you were saying.
Yeah, I've been here. This is my 18th year at the university. I
Wow.
did a variety of things, but I'm basically a theater professor now. I teach a lot of various theater courses here.
And you did your grad work in theater? Is that?
Yes,
Yeah.
I have a Master of Fine Arts from the University of Louisville.
You were saying before you started teaching theater, you were teaching writing here?
I started here teaching the basic speech class, which is great to kind of break down how communication works. Is really helpful to theater and for any kind of analyzing how you speak and communicate.
That's cool. And how long you been teaching theater? Then?
I got my degree in the 90s. And so I was doing a little bit of teaching while I was in school, and then adjuncting around Kentucky, teaching theater classes. And then I started teaching speech here and quickly started adding theater classes. So over 20 years I've been teaching theater.
How many students are at Morehead, would you say?
I actually don't know, and I'm scared I'll misspeak and my university will call me, that was the wrong number. There are several thousand students enrolled. We have a lot of commuter students. It's we're probably pushing 5 figures of students, but a lot of our students are commuter students as well. But you've seen the campus. We have kind of a smaller campus. We have several thousand on campus and a lot more that commute in.
Is it grad students too, or just undergrad?
There are some programs that have a graduate program here.
Yeah.
And some do and some don't.
That's cool. What I love about Elegant Complexity, I listened to some of the other podcast stuff you did, is how as a director, you broke up this massive tome and you explained what each scene you'd want to achieve, right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, as a theater director, what I like to do is take the play and break the play into its beats, a Stanislavski word, beats.
Yeah.
It just means the smallest unit that can exist by itself with like a beginning, middle, and end. For a director, there are kind of swaths, so it may be a page or 2 or 3, depending on the context of the show. For an actor doing a monologue, you'd have to break that monologue into smaller pieces. But from the director's viewpoint, you try to break what you're working on up. Average modern 2-hour play might have 50, 60 beats. For me, Hamlet has about 80 beats, and Wallace's massive, huge novel. Some of his sections are long, and even though I would call it a section, reading Elegant Complexity, some of the longer, like Eschaton or something, you had to break that up even further because it was so long. But yeah, to me, that's the mindset of how I work as a director. How does each unit relate to the overall theme, the essence of the play, and that's what I tried to do. Find why was this little 1 paragraph section that Wallace put in there? It had to be for a reason. It had to be, there must have been some kind of thematic idea he was trying to get across and just trying to discover, because it would, it'd go back and forth between long sections and then it'd be a little blip of something and then move on to something else. Well, what was the importance of that little small section?
And it's such a great, I read, like I was saying to you earlier, that I read your guide before I read Infinite Jest, and then I read it along with Infinite Jest. And you're saying that most people don't read your guide first, right?
What I've been able to see, like from online, most people a lot of times people finish Infinite Jest, and of course you want more, and you want to go back, and I'm sure I can solve some mysteries, and so they pick up my book and read through. Sometimes people have used it, read a section of Infinite Jest, and then read a section of the book. It just, Infinite Jest is already long, so it makes sense that you would wait and kind of read my book afterwards, unless you really wanted some help going through. I had, like with Ulysses, that was kind of the inspiration. The Bloomsday book helped me through Ulysses, and what I would do is I would read one of the long 18 chapters of Ulysses and then go read a chapter of that. I kind of had to keep moving forward. I don't think you necessarily have to with Infinite Jest. I think it's easy enough to read that you don't really need a guide. But then if you get particularly confused, you could pop in and go, oh, okay, and then move on forward.
When you read Infinite Jest, did you read the footnotes along, or did you?
Yes, I did. I loved that quality. Half of them are hilarious.
Right.
You look back there in note 73. I don't have the actual note for IJ fans out there, but you go back and it'll say like no clue, and then you go back to the text. I think that's hilarious. It's just funny.
How long did it take you to read Infinite Jest your first time?
Let me think. I must have started sometime in 2000. I know I finished in January of 2001. I wrote on the old Infinite Summer blog about this, but I was sick, had to call, couldn't go to work, and so I got to read the book all day. I remember being January 2001 and just in a flurry. It's like I couldn't put it down once you hit those last couple hundred pages that are just,
Yeah.
So, so I read it. I don't know how many months it took me. I loved it. I was reading through it pretty quickly, and especially once you hit about page 700, it's like, I don't want to let this go. So
when the action kind of builds the climax, or it starts
that long check where there lots of stories are happening around November 14th, and you cut back and forth in that long swath before Gately and Hal then kind of get immobile. Gately in the hospital. The chapter where Gately's missing get all exciting.
Yeah,
it's running section by section, and then the more plot still goes on in the end of the book, but that reflective Gately's in the hospital and Hal's very reflective, kind of lying down and thinking about his life and everything. So
it's really cool. I was reading on Aaron Swartz's blog that you and him had communicated. Or had you, or he just cited you?
I don't think so. He may have just cited me, because most people, that's the name I've heard when people want to get what they think has gone on with the book. You hear Aaron Swartz's name a lot.
Yeah.
And I remember reading his and going, oh, yeah, that sounds great. Because on the internet, you could read, everybody that loves Infinite Jest, if you have a spare 5 years, you can write your own elegant complexity.
Right.
Because that's kind of what happens on the internet is everyone has their theory. And a lot of times it's pretty persuasive. It's wonderful how many, there's no definitive answer, but there's a lot of you can make a persuasive case for many things.
Yeah.
I generally, read that and go, oh, that's pretty convincing. But then I end up going back to my book and thinking, well, this is kind of what I thought. But, you kind of go back and forth.
And I remember hearing you talk about on that podcast that sometimes people would have questions and you would copy and paste because the book has so many answers.
I was while I was writing the book, I was on the Wallace L listserv. It's no one's going to know what that is on your podcast. Because I had finished the book and I was trying to write this book from 2003 to about 2007. And I would, as people would ask, because this is a lot of people, at that time, social media wasn't as big as it is now. And a lot of people were using this list. There used to be a lot of traffic, where now, there's hardly anything because we have different modes of communication.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of new readers of Infinite Jest, because a lot, some people read it in 1996. I didn't read it until 2000, 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And other people were just discovering it in 2003. And so as people had questions, I had just, I would be taking notes and reading and trying to formulate my book. And as a question would come up, I would cut and paste from something I was writing, this long thing, up there to the list. And it kind of helped me, because I put in the thank you notes to Elegant Complexity. in the acknowledgments, I acknowledged that listserv because it kept my brain working and thinking and logically analyzing things for those years that I went through writing the book. And then after the book was published, it probably gets irritating. People ask questions now, and I'll just go flip to the book and cut something and paste it like I'm trying to advertise the book. But I'm really just answering a question on the spur of the moment about this is not terribly easy. I have to look back at what I've written. Right, I had time to edit it and make it sound eloquent. And I'd like to put my best writing up as an answer. That's, hopefully I can, come up with good answers for you without having to resort to the book.
Did you find that when you were on the listserv, people would give you feedback and then that helped, that changed some stuff or not?
Sometimes
really?
It did.
Yeah.
There were some people that are really astute. I think there's a guy named George Carr in Cleveland that I actually thank in there are a lot of astute readers. And there were several people that would say something. I would go back and jot a note down, in my manuscript of one, because I would work, I knew I was going to take a second pass through because it's so huge, and I would go back at chapter 7, make a note, and then when I get back to that and trying to, run back to the manuscript and incorporate all the notes I'd made along the way, I had notes from various sources, including that listserv.
It's interesting also reading your book and studying the history of Infinite Jest, the small changes Wallace did in some of the different editions to fix the chronology, like little things you noted.
He I think any record I have of that was from Stephen Moore's, the guy that wrote the history of the novel, those 2 huge history of the novel volumes, which are fantastic. Stephen Moore, he was the editor of Donkey Press at the time that Wallace was writing this, and Wallace sent him the first draft. And you can track changes from the first draft to the second draft through his notes. He's actually got a version of that now in his book, My Back Pages, where you don't have to go online to find it now. You can go to Nick Maniatis's The Howling Fantods and find the tracking of the changes from first draft to second draft. You can find it in print now too there. But that's the only way I know to track that is through what he said. So if I noticed a change in version, it would be from his notes. Now that they have the archive in Austin, Texas, there are probably going to be some Infinite Jest scholars that go look for previous drafts of Infinite Jest and track that as well. And we'll have other people find other things maybe that Stephen Moore didn't as he was going through.
And it's kind of cool though. Like what I find interesting is the fandom of Infinite Jest really coincides, like you said earlier, with the rise of social media and the internet, and how like a lot of the archives of right before his death and shortly after is where a lot of the papers and blogs and everything seem to come from on Google, Do you think his passing gave a renewed interest in the book? Or
I think it's possible. The interest was, I think it was pretty solid.
Yeah.
And now then, at the time of Wallace's death, interest in Wallace just blew up.
Yeah.
Because it used to be that, those of us like on the listserv, the Wallace nerds, anything that came out, any publication that came out, we would find it and read it.
Right.
But then after his death, there was so much, I just had to give up. I couldn't read everything. If I spent 24 hours a day reading Wallace scholarship, I would never be able to read it. Because there was a huge increase in interest. I don't think interest in Infinite Jest really had waned, but it certainly, all things Wallace took off in 2008.
Yeah. Had you ever had any interaction with him before?
I did not. I had reserved a place to see him speak at Butler University in Indiana. He was supposed to speak there in, I think, February of 2009, and I had tickets, and then he died in September of 2008. Oh, wow. So, I was never even in the same room with him. So,
wow. What was your first exposure to him? Was it Infinite Jest or was it any of his nonfiction?
I think I'd read The Depressed Person in Harper's Magazine. And then my best friend, gave me a supposedly fun thing I'll never do again. And I read this, think, these are the greatest essays. Because I knew, Depressed Person, I want to read this. The essays were so good. Yeah. And so then when I gave that back, it was, now you need to read Infinite Jest. And so, so that's how I got to it, through the essays first, or one short story, the essays, and then I got to Infinite Jest that way.
I found him through a friend from college, a year older, recommended Signifying Rappers.
Yeah, right. And it makes sense for you to read that one.
And I thought that was like so funny and sharp, and I guess even Wallace admits it felt a little dated in like 2003 when I read it, but then I got into his nonfiction, and for years I'd had Infinite Jest. I'm sure this is a common thing people talk about. And I just said, I'd started it so many times, but then I was like, well, let me get an overview of the story and then I'll dive into it. So your book was the catalyst.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
There was a period I was spending maybe 6-7 hours a day for like a month and a half, reading it. And it was just one of those things like going to the gym, like committing yourself to, but infinitely, so to speak, rewarding, and
yeah.
And how many times would you say you've read it cover to cover?
Well, I read it the first time and then I kept thinking about it. In the process of writing the book, I would read each section over and over and over and over again to take notes and to try to put it in a chronology, like with the stuff in the back of Elegant Complexity, trying to put them in a chronological order and trying to take these notes and trying to mine everything out of that section that I could and take notes on it. So it was kind of a very long 5-year reading over and over and over that got to this book. And now I'm slowly... I have it on my phone now, and I'm slowly making that. Once a month, I'll go read a few pages. I'm almost halfway through on the ridiculously slow read. Now is, I guess, wave 3.
That's amazing. My favorite thing from your book is your interpretation. And you see here, like I underlined, you have this line: although our social systems are built around the ideal of achieving the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, technological advances often promote isolation and self-focus rather than communication with others. And you see, I wrote here, Instagram. That's my note, my marginalia. And then I have your line here, I put a star here. Even if that action seems repetitive and pointless, you talk about choosing action over stasis. It is better to abide moment to moment than to succumb to the passivity of paralyzed stasis, right? And we can unpack that, but those are the two themes I love that you got out of the book about, how we can be separated and how, like Hamlet, you need to make up your mind, right? And take action. And I thought this interpretation was
sometimes
great.
in the action, it's like Gately. I just reread this section on my phone where Gately he got down on his knees every day to the higher power, even though he didn't believe in God, because that's what AA told him to do. And it was like, I don't think it's going to work. But then one day it helped him. And it's the tennis players at ETA, they go through this routine. And then we reach a point where Hal, apparently, can't communicate by the time we get to the chronological end of the novel, actually the first chapter. Hal can't really communicate because he's in that isolated thing, but he can still play tennis because he's worked day to day at ETA, and that his body, because of that repetition, works. So there's that sense of action. You may not know why, or take some act, keep going. It's almost like a Samuel Beckett, the first by theater. If any theater people are listening, you go on. I can't go on. I'll go on. The famous Beckett line.
Is that from Waiting for Godot? Or?
It's from Samuel Beckett.
Yeah.
It's from one of his novels.
Yeah.
But it's the same kind of with Waiting for Godot. Let's shall we go? Let's go, and they don't move. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing.
And then the section with Erdedi when he's getting the call and the doorbell's ringing.
Right, caught between two. Yeah.
That's a theme that you talk about throughout the book, having to make a decision and like the motion that's also immobilized.
Yeah, you could be moving and be in stasis. There's a lot of images of that throughout the book that you're moving but you don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
so it's both. So sometimes you're moving and you don't go anywhere, but sometimes just taking an action, even if you are a hamster in a loop, and at least you're doing something instead of being still. I guess I don't know. It's that's the thing about Infinite Jest is sometimes the analogy is works, and sometimes it's an image for something that's not helpful. So it's kind of like this choice thing. Sometimes you just have to make a choice. It could be that you're making the choice to continue to be a hamster in a wheel, or it could be the choice that you've learned something about how to do the hamster wheel better, or jump off the wheel. But do something. As long as you do something, nothing's going to happen unless you do something, right?
and reading the book is sometimes it feels like that stasis because you sit down with it for an hour and you're just a millimeter deep into it, right? That like the process of engaging with the book is. I don't know. I thought about that, like the idea for me to take the action to read the book and then wanting to write songs about it is me trying to grapple with this thing that seemed infinitely difficult, and having faith that I would get through it. And it's so great to finally meet you and talk to you about the book, and knowing that like our personal journeys, sometimes we can feel isolated now, especially with social media. But if you take that action to reach out or to try to understand something, certain pieces of art or literature will reward you. And I feel like that was some of the greatest hip hop. We were talking about Public Enemy earlier, and this book. And I mean, I just wonder what particularly makes this book so special to you.
It's hard to articulate. You read it and you feel like, oh, if I can just spend some time with this, I'll figure out how to put it all together. But in the process of spending 5 years trying to do that, I figured out, oh, it's not supposed to come together. It's purposefully made where there are these whole. He's talked about the structure of the Sierpinski gasket with holes are always there, and it's there's still this sitting here talking to you. I mean, trying to prepare for this, reading back through. I'm like, I can find an answer if I. It's like even though I know now that it's designed where you have to take this leap of faith and figure out the answer or just accept that there is no answer. There's still the sense that if we talk here long enough, we can find the answer to something. So that's a kind of a magical quality right there.
Right.
You know? Right. So it's like, if I could just, maybe 5 years wasn't enough. If I could reread it closely again, I can, but I think that's the great thing is that Wallace figured out that he could build this structure that kind of keeps this kind of intense interest where the 12 years after I wrote this book, I can sit here and talk to you because there's such an interest in Infinite Jest, and there's a quality about Infinite Jest that makes you want to puzzle over it.
Yeah. Which
is an active, again, we're going to run in circles trying to figure this book out, but it's a fun running in the circle that we're doing.
Yeah. And I another thing that spurred my interest was Chuck Klosterman's, But What If We're Wrong? It's his nonfiction, and he has a section about how do we codify and define the great American novel? And he gives examples of how sometimes you do that retroactively. Moby Dick being a metaphor for Manifest Destiny, right? Mm-hmm. Huck Finn being an example of like the social history, what we'd have to grapple with after the Civil War. Gatsby being about like the idea that we can project perfection. And he makes a point that Infinite Jest will be in 100 years a great candidate for the great American novel because it kind of predicted 9/11 in that there's this idea of terrorism through in our own like mechanized systems, like stuff like that, and our obsession with inaction and entertainment in ourselves, and how this book kind of predicted a lot and is something that might be considered the defining book of the 21st century, even though it was written before. Right. What do you think of that theory?
Yeah, I think when I catch myself, I'm on Facebook so that I can find out what jobs my students get after they graduate. But I'll sit there and I could read a short story, but instead I spent 45 minutes scrolling, and I'll sit there as I'm scrolling saying, "Get off this, get off this," and read a short story, and still scroll, and it's kind of a terrifying entertainment kind of thing. But I think the quality of the novel that makes you want to come back to it, and some prescience about these things are part of it. The thing about the novel is so unique. If there was a sequel, sometimes some people want to take famous novels and make sequels to them. If you made a sequel to Infinite Jest, if Wallace was alive, or if someone tried to do it, it would have to be the same thing where you pile up a bunch of details close to a moment, but then don't solve then you skip over to the next thing, and there's something that's always unknown. You would if you did another Infinite Jest, you'd have to do it like Lynch and Mark Frost just did Twin Peaks, where it's 25 years later, and then we're expecting all the solutions from the series, and really the stuff from the original series are just anchors that keep you connected, and they broaden the story out. Yeah. So if you did it, you would have to, who's at Enid House now, and who's recovering from addiction now, and what are the sports? It would almost be like you'd have to broaden it, and you have the same themes of isolation and needing to make a choice, but then some of whatever happened to Gately, it would be like Gately in the future, and there would be these pieces that you want to know about. What happened to Gately? What happened to Hal? Yeah. And you would have them now, and you still wouldn't know there would be pieces missing. And you have one little solution of something. Oh, here's what they meant about pulling the head out of the casket. they'd give you something like Lynch did with Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
But the essence of Infinite Jest is something's missing,
Right.
and we want to puzzle over it, and it's really more about the themes. If you had to do a sequel, it wouldn't be a plot sequel. It would be a theme sequel.
That's a great point. And maybe like like Twin Peaks having new locations, right?
Right.
Maybe there's
it's
some
not
place in Canada we don't know.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Right. And Twin Peaks, because I think they wanted to broaden it and make it for the whole country and then planet-wide and universal.
Yeah.
And Infinite Jest already had kind of a bit of an international flavor to it, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, they would have to expand thematically instead of plot-wise.
Yeah. I like how throughout your book you specifically connect with Lynch in ways that are so obvious. And reading his essay about Lynch, you know, when he was on Lost Highway, he was on the set of that, I guess.
Yeah.
And one of the characters is one of the students doesn't speak English that well, but keeps using colloquial phrases. He translates them poorly. I forget which that character's name is. Who the scene where
is it Idris Arslanian?
Yeah,
I think,
and that reminded me a lot of the Asian wife of the lumber baron, who takes colloquial phrases and then interprets them in literally.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
And it's made me think about how
Josie,
yeah. How Wallace had so many influences, and then how things like with Oren's interview, where he's just giving the answers, how that really influenced brief interviews with Hideous Men.
Right.
That his stylistically, it's very interesting. Like if I hadn't not to keep going back to it, but it would have been really hard for me to read Infinite Jest without a guide like your book. And I wanted to then talk about the plot of the book, try to make sense of it. And for those of you who haven't read Infinite Jest and don't want spoilers, we're just going to let you know we're going to tell the story of it. So just a warning, but I think it's really helpful to be able to talk with one of the leading Wallace experts in the world about the history of the cartridge and how it makes its way to the ending, and try to create tell the story chronologically together right now. If you're down, Greg.
Yeah. It's so strange because the mystery starts from the very beginning. Jim, Hal's father, who is becomes a wraith in most of our story. The wraith tells Gately in the hospital bed that he made that cartridge for Hal, to bring Hal out of himself. But there's problems right there, because you go back to that early scene in the book, the professional conversationalist, a flashback when Hal was very small, and he was talking to his dad. Yeah. And Jim was thinking Hal was not speaking and Hal was speaking. So he's like, Dad, so there's like Hal's talking and Jim doesn't hear him, which is kind of like the reverse of in the opening of the book in The Year of Glad. Hal's talking, but the administrators can't hear him. But so already, did Hal necessarily need that, or was Jim not interpreting? Regardless, Jim makes the film. But if he's just making it for Hal, then obviously he's not going to mass produce it. And did Jim know it was dangerous? If so, there seems to be this limited, like there's only one master or something, that Mario and Avril and the lawyers know was buried with Jim in his casket. But based on what happened in the novel, copies must have been made.
And it's to give some background, he was a scientist who discovers film, right? Jim was, right?
Yeah, he had several careers. He had a physics of like a fiber optic, well, not fiber optic, but electromagnetic, some kind of physical discoveries in that realm. Yeah, and then moved to film. Well, tennis, and then the physics science career, and then film.
And is it worth mentioning like what we speculate is on this film that kills people?
Well, they say in there it's Joelle, the most beautiful woman in the ever, or like, yeah. And there's another theory we could get into about how I believe that the acid that scarred her face made it where people were so drawn to her. Perhaps it's like an extra vulnerability. She was already beautiful, and then somehow this scar made it where you couldn't look away. So she joined UHID, the Union of the Hideous and then probably Deformed, and she wears the veil all the time.
How did she get scarred?
There, late in the book, she had gone Orrin had come home with her at a Thanksgiving, and some family trauma came out, and the acid got through. I think her mom or someone, I forgot who it was, threw the acid, and Orrin ducked. Because they were trying to throw the acid at Orrin, and Orrin ducked, and the acid hit Joelle.
And that reminded me of Nathaniel Hawthorne's Minister's Black Veil. Do you know that short story?
I don't know that.
It's about this minister who wears a veil, and it's what he's covering up, but it kind of is speculated that maybe there's nothing there. You know? So that I wondered if he is reference to Hawthorne, maybe not.
Well, he could be. He knew all the books, but I think that's because it says somewhere in there that she did this last film with Jim unveiled. I think there's a quality of her scarred face and Jim's lenses that are supposed to give you kind of a baby's eye view, a neonatal processing. And she's saying these calm, like, I'm sorry, kind of in her awesome voice that she has her own radio program that compels people as well. So I think it's just this compelling, and I think it's like it compels to your sense of self-absorbed, this is just for you, kind of thing. So I think that's the power of the film is this. It's a film where people don't look away. They don't necessarily die from it, but they refuse to eat. They won't go away from it. So after a certain amount of time, and you haven't eaten, and you're sitting there, in your own waste, and you eventually die from not eating because you can't look away from the film. And it's the nature of the film.
In the film, is the mom smothering the baby, killing the baby, or just apologizing?
I don't know. I think there's some discussion of the logic of the woman who killed you as your next life's mother or something.
Okay.
That's kind of mythos that goes along with it. But all we know of the film is that image of her just saying, I'm sorry. Maybe that's supposed to be associated with the death. I'm not...
Okay.
Sure, but I don't think it's supposed to be an act of violence. I think the thing that keeps people from looking away is a comforting thing. This is now, you'll have to make your own opinions like millions of people have done. This is just me saying what I've drawn from the text.
Okay, so it's this cartridge, and it's also called the Sammy's Dot, right?
Yeah, after the old rush, you would sneak papers around in underground literary circles in Russia, things you weren't supposed to read. So that it's things that it's supposed to be dangerous.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know if Jim thought it'd be dangerous or not, but clearly he wanted it buried in his cat. It was only supposed to be for Hal. So how did copies get made? And my guess was that somehow in Jim's laboratory, someone must have made copies. Someone savvy. There's a guy named Disney Leith, who was Joelle. Joelle was learning about how to do film too, and he was her mentor. Somebody, but that's the problem. Is there's no motive for anyone to want to make a copy back when no one knew about it but Jim. So maybe I'm having to get, and here I try to stay close to the text, but this is wildly off. Maybe Disney Leith was the cinematographer and knew it was something and this is where you have to kind of jump off and guess about how copies got made. So you almost have to leave a hole and say somehow, and I did a lot of talking about this in Elegant Complexity, somehow copies got made.
And so was it buried in his head or in
there? He says in that Jim says in that conversation with his son that he mentions that there's something in his head.
Yeah.
But this is before the film was made. So there's something supposed, and Jim was, he could be crazy talking in that episode. But what I found curious is that Jim went away after the film was made and before his death. He died shortly after the film was made. He went off somewhere for some kind of surgery. And it always made me wonder, well, did he take those things out of his head and implant the master in his head, or was it just buried in the casket? Again, these are things we don't know. It could be that it is implanted in his head, and some people say, well, it was an antidote to the film implanted in his head. There's no way to know these things definitively. But as a minimum, the master would be in the casket. Was it in his head or not? Maybe because the dream, Hal's remembrance and Gately's vision of the future both have, them pulling something out of the casket, and one image is of it being Jim's head and Hal saying, Gately's dream of Hal saying, too late, like someone has already gotten the film. Right. But how did anyone know it was in the casket other than the lawyers Avril and Mario, because Oren supposedly didn't know and didn't tell the Canadian terrorists that the film was in the casket.
Right. But did Jim want Hal to dig it up and get it? Like, how was Jim to give this magical film to his son?
That's another. Maybe he had made it for Hal and then realized it
Was dangerous?
was dangerous, or why would he bury it? Why would he not? Maybe he wanted to leave it for Hal, but it was dangerous. Again, I try to quote some text when I'm giving an opinion.
Yeah, right.
We're in a realm now where it's very hard to say we're giving a definitive interpretation, because it's hard to find quotes to attach to. In the end of my book, I tried to attach some of the things I'm saying to some quotes from the book that you can look up.
Yeah, and
but that's it. Yeah, he said it was for Hal, but he buried it. So what? Yeah.
And then and that is what is like amazing about Infinite Jest is you finish it, you realize the quote unquote answers are in the first 100 pages, 50 pages, maybe even with the interview and then the dream. And so then, mate, what's your story, right? The fact that like he's hospitalized and we're going to attempt to tell what happened. But to understand it, it's really this willful suspension of disbelief, and having a knowledge of Hamlet is very important too. How he's trying to emulate that, right? A little bit.
He's, there's a lot of references and a lot of overlap. I don't think it's a revenge plot, because Jim, he made this, he's not saying avenge my death. I mean, there's a mystery as to Jim's suicide by putting his head in the microwave, but who left him the wild turkey with the bow by the microwave?
Yeah.
But instead of talking about revenge, when the wraith, the ghost of Hal's father appears, it's all about, it's a much more positive, lessons learned. We need to reach each other story.
Yeah.
From Jim the Wraith. And it's to Gately, not Hal. So,
and it's also interesting learning about Wallace's life, the athlete, the sober person, the teacher, like those three things in the three locations, and his, maybe, I don't know how much we can tap into Wallace's connection with the Canadian separatists, but definitely the recovery house and Enfield, right? Like that, they're all pieces of himself. So maybe Gately being reached is purposeful, right? Because he's himself being reached by the power of choosing action over stasis in writing a book like this. It's a broad interpretation.
And Gately can't move at the time.
Yeah.
And so the Wraith has a captive audience because Gately's and Gately is in a state where he can perceive, maybe, he's in a different state. He's, recovering from the gunshot wound and is able to listen instead of flitting around like everybody else.
Okay, so this is a very good start. So there's this cartridge that gets created somehow.
And there's no problem for years, because he died in, I'm going to just say 2004, year trial size dove bar, I call it 2004. And you don't know anything about the cartridge for years. And then there's a few cities where something seems to be happening.
Right.
And one of the, either Morath's, the Canadian terrorist spy, or the United States, USOU, the sort of like CIA, FBI, the USOUS, the United States Office of Unspecified Services. Somebody thinks that it's Oren, Hal's brother, that's doing this as a revenge thing. But it is very, Oren just doesn't seem to be as checked in to, I don't think Oren, the guy, the medical attaché that died on April the 1st received a cartridge in the mail. This is 2009.
Okay.
There's hints of something happening with the film before then that are contained. But then this medical attaché receives it, watches it. The people that come to check on ends up being dozens of people surrounding this video, and now it's a big thing that the government's needing to cover up or check into.
Yeah.
But who sent that? And they think it may be Oren, but Oren just, and because it was mailed from Arizona, where Oren's from, but to me, it seems more likely that Avril, Jim's wife, who is Canadian from the same county as some of the Quebecois terrorists are from, would be behind it. But there's no way to prove it. It says that she hasn't left the grounds since Jim's been like, she could have mailed it to Arizona and someone else mailed it. Her and Orrin are not on speaking terms for years. So the pieces, you would think it would need to be one of them or the terrorists themselves, but the terrorists don't really find a copy of the terroristic entertainment that they can use until months after this attaché incident.
Right.
So how did, we're getting to the end, back to the middle, I think there must have been copies in Jim's lab, maybe stored away that people forgot and then taking the trash, the young kids at the tennis academy take the trash out.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that maybe videos came out, they were trying to take them to the trash and some fell out of the sack. And then Clonette, who works at Ennett House, one of their Ennett House jobs is to be janitors for the tennis academy across the street. They get the videos in the trash. Clonette turns it in and says, hey, check these out. Morath, the spy, when he's trying to find Joelle, sees those videos on the shelf in Ennett House. And then later they say there's some hint that Hal went to Ennett House one day to ask for information. And in that section, there's a hint that something went on at Ennett after the book closes, and we don't know.
Yeah.
Apparently something happened at Ennett House. And then there's also mention of a continental emergency, like the terroristic film, the film you can't look away from, has disseminated. But there is no way to because there's that gap of a year between what we know is happening and then Hal's opening statement where no one can understand him.
Yeah.
But apparently things are going on. I mean, the subsidized time is no longer, and things have had radical changes.
Oh.
Because there's a note that says the year of GLAAD is the last year of subsidized time. Does that, what does that mean? That, because Gento is in the middle of his presidency. Why would things change? So there's a mystery of what happened. One, how did the original piece get copied enough to come back at this time years later to be an object of terror? But there's so many hints that that it's hard to connect the pieces. I tried to spell out a range of possibilities that could have happened.
Yeah. What about when they go to rob the man and they accidentally suffocate him? Right.
Gately, when he's still a criminal before he's come to Ennett House, the guy that they killed was the leader of all the Canadian terrorist organizations, Duplessis.
Yeah.
And this guy, the guy that got smothered, Gately's partner, I think it's Tom Kite, took the videos and sold them to a guy named 60s Bob, who sold them to the Antitois, which is where Morath and the wheelchair assassins find videos. And even then, it's not definitively that it could have come from that burglary, because one of the Antitois were watching the films and didn't see an object of terror, but maybe he just didn't get through all of them. But that seems to be a path that Duplessis had a copy, and then the Canadian terrorists eventually found it because it was in the Antitois shop.
So could Duplessis have gotten it from someone at Ennett House?
Well,
or
Jim,
Enfield, I mean?
Jim in the conversation with Hal says his family is connected to Duplessis, which Duplessis' lover is Luria Perec, who was from the same county as Avril, and they're all Canadian. So I would think that Avril would be the tie. But I noted in the book, just like in Hamlet, you can't definitively say how much complicity Gertrude had. How much did Gertrude know about King Hamlet's death? Is she clueless, or did she know what Claudius was doing? You cannot prove from the text, as far as I've been able to tell, how much Avril was involved. Was Avril part of this terrorist thing?
Yeah.
Or not? Did she? Because as soon as you say, well, maybe Avril left him the alcohol to get him, to lead him to suicide. But she was the one that drove him to the detox that he had just before he died. So it's the facts never line up.
You can't be sure beyond a reasonable doubt. Right.
And that's what makes the thing so interesting.
Yeah.
Because I feel like right now it's like, well, let's just take a minute, look through the book, we'll find it. If we could just read it again and find it. But it's set up for you not to be able to solve it, but to also always feel like that you can.
Right. Like you can always have that focus.
So I think that's part of some of Wallace's philosophical study and setting things up like a logic problem and putting these factors in place that will keep you it's guaranteed to keep you thinking about it.
He was a big fan of Wittgenstein, right? What do you know much about Wittgenstein's philosophy?
All that I've read, and this is why I love reading Wallace. Because of Wallace, I went and read Wittgenstein's two most famous philosophical works. But no, it's just his interpretation of it. I don't find direct correlations. There are. I'm just not philosophically astute enough to make these connections. But
he basically, isn't it like language can't completely emulate reality?
Yeah.
And so maybe that we can extrapolate that the language of the book can't emulate this made up reality he made.
Just as our language, we can interpret things how we wish, and that you can't always put definitive proof on things. Yeah. So I would think some of those philosophical theories are kind of lead toward the composition of the book that proves that for us indirectly.
Do you have a favorite character, Greg, from Infinite Jest?
It's hard because there's hundreds.
Yeah, right.
I don't think so. I love them all.
That's fair. That's
hard,
fair.
Yeah, it's hard to pick one out.
And it's interesting how the characters sometimes you lose track of who's talking when, but sometimes that doesn't matter, I found. You know what I mean? Like I'd really try to make sure I knew, but it's just letting the experience wash over you, right? Like the entertainment.
Yeah, I think, exactly. Because the narrator, I call it the narrator for whoever's speaking, because it's third person narration, but it's so into the head of who they're talking about, Hal or Pemulus or whoever.
Yeah.
That, you lose track of who's talking, but the narrator is so intrusive that you kind of always know what's going on. And even when Wallace wants to make, a 3-page, 200-word sentence, or his syntax is so well done that you never have to stop and figure out what does this refer to. Again, you don't want to stop and look back and figure out who's talking because it's so interesting and it's easy enough to follow that you just go through.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. That's what I enjoy about it. It's so fun to read. There's such great imagery in all the little details that trying to figure things out is just kind of the fun thing that comes after.
Throughout the book, what concrete chronological movements does the entertainment go through getting?
Well, the film was made right before Jim's death. So I think that was 2004. It's been a while since I've checked into this, but so then after Jim's death, there is a lull before there's a hint of this mysterious cartridge showing up as a couple of years later. So there must have been copies made before his death.
Okay.
Because it's supposed to have gone into his casket and then someone removed it. And so,
okay,
so there's the original master eventually removed, but before, I guess there could be a theory that it was removed from his casket and copies were made from that. Like maybe nothing happened between then.
Isn't also the theory that the master couldn't have been viewed by the Canadians who had it stolen from them because it's the master, right?
The master has to have special equipment to be viewed.
Yeah.
A copy is viewed on our regular VCRs.
Yeah.
So the master is one entity, and from that special machine, you can make copies if you have the right equipment. But then if you make a copy, it can be watched on regular equipment.
Yeah.
So if you watch the master on regular equipment, you don't see anything.
Can you make a copy of a copy, or only from the master?
Only from the master.
So, and there's only one master.
That's why they call it a copy-capable master.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can only make copies from the master. So there must have been either in the either copies were made before he died, or there was a master left in the lab,
right?
Or someone got it from his casket early enough that then they could use that master to make copies. But it wouldn't have been the Canadian terrorist. It would have to be someone like Avril
who knew
saying it. But there's just no proof of that. We know the film's gone from the casket, but ideas of who could have gotten it from the casket, that is impossible to figure out. It just seems no one seems to have the motive, or there doesn't seem to be a clue or any kind of hint in the text for how that would have happened.
Okay, so it's out, and the first guy to come to a sad end by watching is the medical attaché. Is that the first reported one?
There were cartridges in 4 cities. I reread back over what I'd written at the end. There was something in Berkeley.
Yeah.
Although that may be happening at the same time as the attaché, and then there is something in some like Tempe, Arizona, and somewhere in Louisiana, and then the Boston event of the medical attaché.
Yeah.
And that all seems to link to Orrin, because Orrin used to play football in New Orleans, then he moves to the Cardinals, so things point to Orrin. But can you see? It just seems strange.
Yeah.
Orrin just didn't seem like Orrin would do the terror. It seems much more likely that Avril would be sending the thing as an object of terror.
And maybe it was a sign of love for her late husband, as a way to show him that she loved him by sending out his experiment. That's the theory,
but the thing is, she was having an affair with the medical attaché.
Right.
So, and he must have broken it because he got married. You figure out from he got married, and maybe she was upset about that.
Okay.
Or maybe, and the cartridge was labeled Happy Anniversary, and the medical attaché watched it on April the 1st was the anniversary of Jim's death.
Oh, wow.
So it's some kind of revenge or,
we don't
thing that happens there.
So talking with you about this means that if you don't, as a reader, if you don't have all the answers, that's okay, because no one has all the answers. And that's like for people listening to this who are maybe thinking about tackling the book, you can be fearless, because even an expert on the book is open to possibilities. You can
make your own. You'll feel like you can make your own connection, which is great. And then when you do, post it online, and I'll look at it and go, "Oh my God, they finally figured it out." I feel like that's still going to happen, even though I know it's set up not to happen. I still feel like that's going to happen. I'm going to read something online that's go, "Oh my God, they solved it."
So this all happens, and then chronologically, the Canadian separatists want to get their hands on this,
right?
So they
know
can
about
use it,
and they want to use it to disseminate it across. And that's where all the philosophy is. The American thinks it's cruel, and the Canadian says, "Oh, I'm just offering it. It's the American sensibility that makes this choice to give themselves over to it, like we do with Facebook." Like I was saying about I'm doing with Facebook before, but thank God it's only like 45 minutes at a time instead of days at a time. I have a choice. I'm sitting there. I should be able to make the choice to get off of that. So there's this debate about the American psyche between the American and the Quebecois. But they don't. But the Quebecois terrorists, the wheelchair. There are many terrorist organizations. The wheelchair assassins are who I'm talking about. The wheelchair assassins do not find. He acts like he has a copy, bluffing to the American. They do not find a copy they can use until November of 2009. The attaché dies in April of 2009. The Canadians don't find something they can use until November 2009. So I don't think it was the Canadians then when they wouldn't to the Middle Eastern attaché. They're trying to terrorize the United States.
Right.
But I don't. So I think that's probably the route that leads to the continental emergency. Something happens between November of 2009 and November 2010. I'm thinking continental emergency must mean that, and they're making that funny commercial about don't watch this video if it comes to you.
Yeah.
So it's, I think the government, United States government and marketing people are prepared for it. Something must happen with it. But I hesitate to speculate on what all could have happened when the thing goes nationwide.
And they are trying to get very close to the Incandenza family by any means necessary, right?
Because they think that's where they can find. That's where the terrorists think they can find a copy. But they've got Avril, who has links to Duplessis, and all, and the whole terrorist organization. So you would think that they would. maybe she's not a terrorist. They would seems like they would just talk to her, and not the Canadians would seem like they would just talk to Avril or get. Maybe after Duplessis died, they're trying to get close to her. I'm not sure. It's just strange.
And I wonder if Oren's relationship with the Canadian terrorist, the transgender one, what's his name or her name?
Right. Steepley. Hugh Steepley is going undercover as Helen Steepley.
Yeah.
But Oren to me just seems when he talks to Hal he's clueless about that she is undercover.
Yeah.
Oren just seems a little too self-motivated to have a lot of scheme in this, but several factors lead to him being the one to be able to do it too. So I don't know. And he does give Hal a mysterious phone call early in the book that's very strange.
Yeah.
Quoting Beatle lyrics and stuff in the early part of the book. Yeah. So that's like, what's up with that? So.
Well, and then meanwhile, there's all this supernatural stuff at Enfield with the Wraith that,
who supposedly can't move objects, he says, but then he brings Gately the Coke can from China, and then stuff's being moved around in Orthostice's room. So again, it's like you say you can't move things, but things are being associated with you being around Wraith Jim.
and so then there's this question of whether the Madam Psychosis on Hal's toothbrush causes him to go over the edge.
Yeah,
later,
I have the unexciting theory that Hal did not watch the video. Hal did not take the DMZ drug that's also called Madam Psychosis, just like Joel's character.
Yeah.
I say that his isolation is because he stopped using marijuana.
Right.
And I pointed to a lot of clues for that. I think it's near impossible that he watched the film, because there's a lot of references to films being labeled or unlabeled to track that. But then if he watched it, wouldn't he still be watching it? I mean, or is it, since he made it for Hal, would Hal be the one that can watch it and it not affect? But I think the clues to Hal watching the video are very low. Now, because there is a chance that he took that drug, because there's a brief moment where he has a NASA glass that he keeps a toothbrush in.
Uh-huh.
And at one point, he leaves that and he gets it back later. So someone could have dosed it. But at that time, no one knew where the drug was but Pemulus. He had put it in a ceiling tile.
Okay, yeah.
And it's missing from the ceiling tile, and Pemulus doesn't know who got it. Uh-huh. And only 4 people knew it was there. And I don't think the other people. So did the Wraith get it? Did the Wraith put something on the toothbrush to get him to do it? But the effects of the DMZ are described as being pretty horrific and psychically damaging, but then I guess there are some theories that it kind of leaves you befuddled. But to me, it seems more likely that Hal's, because the book is so much about the effect of drugs on you, that his crutch for being able to communicate face to face is gone. And so when the marijuana's gone, he retreats into himself.
Yeah.
Because when he narrates to us in the first chapter, he's very lucid and eloquent, and we can follow him. But the administrators can't follow what he's doing because he just seems to be moving tennis-wise and saying things they can't understand.
Yeah.
So I think it's because he's so into his head that he's retreated. He doesn't have that bridge to be even make any kind of social connection. But that, some people just know he took the drug. So it's, and that's, again, both possibilities are there. You just kind of have to, I choose that I think he's in withdrawal from marijuana. A lot of people choose that he took the drug. So it's, you have to read the text and see what you think your best answer is.
Is it related to the mold he ate as a kid too, maybe?
There's the drug itself is is mold based. And then there is that sequence where Hal doesn't remember, but Oren tells him that he ate this mold as a child.
Yeah.
And did that ingestion of that mold stick around and get triggered by the DMZ? Another clue where you don't know. But there's also supposed to have been steroids in his cereal at that time as well, not related to the drug.
By himself or someone put
by Avril putting steroids in his cereal
to make him
according
stronger?
to that conversation early in the book between Jim and young Hal.
Oh my gosh. So we do know that though, that Jim made the entertainment as a way to reach Hal.
That's what Wraith Jim tells Gately in his hospital bed.
Right. Okay. So moving forward,
which is odd because it's supposed to make Hal reach out, but the video itself is infantilized. It makes people want to sit there like a baby and be taken care of. So maybe Jim, who couldn't hear Hal talk and is like, Dad, I'm talking to you. Maybe he had a strange idea about why would Jim think that this movie that makes you feel like a baby is going to bring you out of your shell. It's just what?
Yeah.
So
it's very confusing. Yeah. But that maybe it's a way of
hopefully this is making your listeners say, well, I'll figure this out. There's enough clues here. I'll read it and figure it out.
They'll give us the answers. So moving along, it becomes this like these errant characters looking for the entertainment and all trying to find answers from each other. And it seems like a lot of the how do you say it? Sierpinski gasket. Sierpinski gasket is that these infinite triangles, right? But they all benefit from coming together. The interactions between
it's connected in the triangle geometry.
Yeah.
But with each iteration, one triangle becomes three smaller triangles and a hole. Something's going to be missing. So as you go further, you get more and more detail. Inside the triangle, there's more details. And then inside of that, one of three is more detail. But as you keep going further, holes accompany each new depth of detail.
Right. To infinitely.
Yes.
And that's an interesting connection to the title too. And you talk about in the introduction how that's like the Triforce from Zelda, right? Do you mention that?
That's Triforce Zelda's not me. Oh, that's somebody else.
But like
there's a million theories.
that I have a song about the Triforce. The triangles that have the triangle in the middle, the upside down. Yeah. And so they all, but all three, the terrorists, the recovery house, and Enfield, they all benefit from knowing each other, and the story becomes the lives of these people as they all try to piece this mystery together, and then it culminates with Gately staying sober until the end, right? And that becomes
we think he does. When he goes into the hospital, he's desperately trying to get them not to give him morphine, even though he's recovering from a bullet wound.
So let's talk.
He's like the heroic character.
How he gets shot. Let's talk about that real quick.
That was just that didn't have to do with the entertainment. That was just one of the Innit residents was causing trouble, and it kind of did because one of Randy Lenz killed the dog of a rival Canadian terrorist organization, not the wheelchair assassins, but the FLQ. So the FLQ organization came after Gately, not having anything to. They were a Canadian terrorist organization, but it has nothing to do with the film.
Oh wow!
It's just this guy killed my dog. I'm going to kill you. And Gately had to protect the people in the house.
And they're all moving their cars, and it was chaos.
Right, because of the rules. They caught them at midnight at the switching hour.
Yeah,
instead of the witching hour. Yeah. So Gately was shot.
Okay,
and that's how he goes into the hospital and sets him up to be still enough where he can. Wallace can use the final sections of the book for Gately to reflect upon his life, because he has all these memories coming back and forth of his childhood, and time gets kind of amorphous. It's very difficult to figure out what's happening when in that book, because he's remembering his past, things are happening in the present, and things are jumping around.
Yeah.
And your listeners may be going, why, if they've said 30 confusing things about the plot of this book, would I care to read it? It's because the thematic, this sense of working together to solve something, or to address or to understand the core and essence of human loneliness and addiction and isolation. It's a way to kind of understand or get into that. And what we haven't talked about is often the book is hilariously funny.
That's very true.
There's a lot of very funny things that happen in the book. So.
And like the eschaton chapter, which your book is named after.
Yes.
The elegant complexity of that. Do you have a scene that to you is the funniest scene from the book?
One of my favorite scenes is the eschaton scene.
Yeah.
Funniest could be eschaton, but there's so many funny places I'm trying to think of how that comes to mind. I don't know, the going over the video, like trying to warn again that when they're trying to make a video that helps you not learn how not to watch the entertainment. That one's pretty funny. There's a lot of funny things all the way through, little moments here and there.
And I remember reading Wallace's interviews about the book, he says, "Oh, it's not supposed to be funny." But it's hard for me to believe that he didn't think certain things were. He says it's more sad than funny, which might be true.
No, I believe it is more sad than funny, but page to page, the things that happen are very funny.
Yeah.
But then when you look back, it kind of accurately takes the pulse of an American malaise that is quite sad.
And that did you ever watch the end of the tour?
Yeah.
And when he tells the author about how really there's this American identity that if you just work hard enough, if you just do enough, if you just practice enough, if you just, study enough, you can solve what's deeply wrong inside of you, right? Remember, that's like a final thing he tells the author about why he wrote it. And wondering if you think that's true, if that's a theme in this book, that like the infinite desire to improve ourselves is like this American malady, or,
Well, there's the American dream. I see it as kind of a poisonous phrase because there's the theater major here again.
Yeah.
Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. Willie believes the American dream and it doesn't come through for him. Edward Albee has a play called The American Dream, and it kind of taught we have an idea of how in America of this kind of how things are that is not always tied to reality. And now in our current political situation, we're so divorced from reality. And I think maybe social media that helped, like on my feed is all the stuff that that's right. My feed is giving me stuff that validates me, and all we get is things that validate us, and I don't get to be persuaded by your opinion, and it's really putting us way out. But then, so now this vision of the American dream, from whatever side you're on, is starting to become kind of poisonous because it's not complete. And I think there's always been, even before social media, with these old plays I'm talking about, there's this idea of what things are, but that's not the truth. And really the truth is more in day to day what you're doing. And I like the model of this book because the point is not the answer. The point is like the day to day reading of it, and the fact that you and I can sit here and have this hour conversation and enjoy it. I mean, if the book was easily solvable, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We wouldn't get to meet each other and talk about it. Because it would just be, I know this. I'll go on to the next thing. I'll go into the next thing in my feed.
It asks more. The book asks more questions than it answers, maybe, or asks enough questions to make us want to talk about it, right?
Yeah, or there's infinite, like, because they have all those meetings where people tell their story about how they hit rock bottom, and
right.
There's always, everybody. What's your story? Everybody's got their story.
Yeah,
and it's the idea is just kind of attending maybe to these stories, and
it's a book that I guess we can end this talking about like why we recommend people to read it. And I guess you've kind of touched on that. Any other reasons why you would like recommend fans to read it for the first time?
I think I would do like I did. If you read A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again, the actual essay, you can find, it was called Shipping Out. A shorter version of it is called Shipping Out in Harper's Magazine. If you can find that on Harper's online. Or read that long. It's a 100-page essay, the full essay in the book, the title essay of that book. If you like that voice, that is hilarious on every page. It's funny, but it's also got kind of a mistrustful view of how things go. The essay is about how Wallace feels pampered to death on a cruise, and it makes him uncomfortable that he's being pampered, which causes for a lot of humor. He's a little judgmental throughout it, but it's very funny judgmental. It's I guess heading toward blog post meanness, but not quite there. So it's not terrible as offensive, but it's very funny.
Yeah.
And if you like that voice, if you feel like what it felt like to me is that he gets to like the honest truth. Like it's like a voice inside your head instead of an outside voice being quite truthful about what's happening in the moment. That's what draws me to the writing. And that kind of honesty of that essay, I think, prepared me. If you start reading Infinite Jest, it's going to feel confusing because he takes the first couple hundred pages just giving you 300 characters, just all this. It's hard to see where it's going until later, and that might be frustrating. It wasn't to me. It was so fun to read. It didn't bother. I would be flipping back, but then I don't want to flip back. I'm enjoying reading it so much. I'll figure it out later.
Yeah.
But I would see if you like the voice. Just see if it's a voice that you connect with. There's a lot of this latest wave of Wallace criticism is a little backlash about, he's so very much a white male, and even I'm reading some new scholarship, even on like in Signifying Rappers, where he tries to qualify. Well, look, I'm just a white male talking about this.
Yeah.
There's some essays talking about how that's disingenuous as well. And I think that's fine. And there are some problems with that kind of privileged perspective. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But there's still, even recognizing that, or if you go into that and some people get offended by that they kind of feel that white privilege coming out in them when they read now. But even that, if you know that's there, you can get to what's underneath that's meaningful to everyone or funny to everyone or honest for everyone.
And it seems people get to the Wardeen section where he's doing the African-American voice, right?
Yeah, and I think that's just a kind of a, I've said that on the other podcast where I'm on the Great Cacavity podcast, where I think he was trying to do something based in empathy, but there's no way to look at a white man trying to speak as an African-American and see that as empathetic. It's just not going to be seen that way. So it is, it is what it is. It's an attempt at something positive, but it cannot be seen that way. Or maybe it was maybe it was a choice. Maybe he should have found another way to do that.
Yeah.
Given he was a very intelligent guy. He could see how that was going to be interpreted. Or maybe in 1996, he didn't see how that was going to be interpreted, but he could have in 1996 and maybe gone about it a different way. I still think it was hard to authentically get inside the terror of that situation without that voice, but I also see why people would complain about it. It makes complete sense.
Do you think if Infinite Jest were to come out tomorrow, would it still have the effect that it had in 1996?
Wow. I think if it did, I would have to do the Twin Peaks thing. It would have to be a new thing that was rooted in the nostalgia of the old, but it would have to be a new thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are many scholars that talk about it as very much a product of its time.
Right.
Very much a product of its time. And we forget that one of Marshall Boswell, one of the kings of the Wallace criticism, speaks about that a lot, how Wallace was one of many people writing at that time. For me, he kind of stands out as a unique thing, but for a lot of I'm a theater guy. A lot of English guy, a lot of literary people very much see Wallace as part of a particular time period. And there's some scholarship that speaks to that a great deal. And you can, if you're interested, you can find scholarship on all topics now. It's blown up where there's a wide range of topics about Wallace that you can read.
I read the biography about him. Every love story is a ghost story.
Yeah.
And learning that his pain in not being able to create another book that was as commercially loved and critically adored as Infinite Jest was a big part of his depression later in his life. And I'm wondering, what do you think of like his other works? And
well, he, writing the stories in Oblivion, those are, I think, are extraordinary because instead of having the pressure of a novel, it's like, I'm just going to write a short story anywhere from, 3 to 100 pages. The efficiency, maturity, amazing ability to get at some of the things he was talking about in this book kind of down in that short story limit produced magnificence, right? With Pale King writing a novel, he felt like he needed to encompass it. This is me talking. I'm not basing this on anything. Yeah. It's that he wanted to get it all in there, and it was hard to essentialize it. In Infinite Jest, it's not. There is a core essence about the book thematically. I think that's what grounds it. But the story, the plot, as you've discovered if you've been listening with us this long, it's hard to tie up or contain.
Yeah.
The containment of Infinite Jest is in its themes.
Yeah.
And I think he was trying to do it with the Pale King, but he couldn't. It's like he couldn't express what he wanted to say because it's hard to nail down the truth. This is the truth. Boom. It's everywhere. And I think he was struggling to wrap what he wanted to say into a contained thing because it was a novel. It could be as long as you want.
Sure.
Yeah. If it's short stories, okay, I got to do this, and so I will. With the novel, there's that permission to, I think he wanted to have the containment of a short story in the novel form. Maybe, and it was just wouldn't coalesce because when you're trying to speak of the truth, we've been sitting here trying to get at something about this novel. And you just have to keep talking around. And it's like you could talk forever to try to contain it, and it keeps looping. And I think that's probably what was going on with the Pale King.
The idea of circumlocution, right? You speak around something as a way to describe it, but you never quite get it.
You can't. Yeah, it's like if you could, it wouldn't be what we're talking about. It would be something simpler.
What do you recommend fans after they read Infinite Jest, if they've read some of his nonfiction and then Infinite Jest, what should they follow up with? And I guess, what should I read next? What do you think?
Wow. Since you have read Infinite Jest and didn't throw it against the wall and quit, you can read anything.
Yeah.
If you haven't read the big stuff, to me, for the first time reader, I would try those Supposedly Fun Thing and then some short stories. Oblivion are the best, I think.
Okay. I haven't read Oblivion, so.
Oblivion are the finest examples. If you want to save the best for last, then go through the other short stories.
Okay. Did you like Pale King?
If I'm recommending to you, I would probably say Oblivion just because of how great they are. Yeah, Pale King because it is it's unfinished novel, but it's still, I would, if I'm going to, just a personal opinion, if I'm ranking the best works, I'm always going to love Infinite Jest, Oblivion, and I would fiction. I'd probably put Pale King next. Those essays, I love all the essays too. Those are fun to read. So my recommendation to you, fiction, go to Oblivion, essays, go to Supposedly Fun Thing, and then you'll want to read all the essays.
Do you recommend Broom of the System?
Yeah, it's the first novel. It's clearly him doing his first thing, but it's still great.
Okay.
Yeah, I would. It's clearly earlier.
Okay.
But it's still fun to read.
So that later. Read that later.
I would go to Oblivion, Supposedly Fun Thing next.
Did you see the brief Interviews with Hideous Men movie?
Did I see all of it? I know I saw part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed what I saw. I think I saw all of it. Yeah.
Do you think they could ever turn Infinite Jest into a movie? Speaking of that.
I would want it to be a long form.
Yeah.
Like a series.
Like Game of Thrones or something.
Yeah, just film it all and air it in 52 episodes and call it Year of Glad show in a week. No, you get when you change mediums, you have to change some things, and there's such purists about the book, it would be hard to please everyone. I think if you've got it in the hands of someone who is only changing things when they have to, I think it could be great. If it was a Lynch, if we could do like Twin Peaks where people are like, Lynch just went, you're not going to be able to make sense of this. I'm just putting it out there for these images and for the feeling I want you to have and thoughts about time stream and how things could go. If it's like that, where you don't have to make it, you don't have to resolve it. If you could do it like the new Twin Peaks and keep it unresolved, that would be great. I would watch it. I'm not going to judge actors. This goes back to when Tom Cruise was going to be in Interview with the Vampire and everyone was like dissing him.
Yeah.
But then, for the time, he did a really good job. Anne Rice took out a full page ad apologizing and saying he did a great job and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
And then people were harshing on
Jason
Segel. When they were harshing on him, like he's going to not be good as a wall. But I thought he did a fine job.
Yeah,
my wife and I finished watching it, and I called up the Charlie Rose interview, and she goes, "Oh yeah, he did a great job." I mean, you could see that, and actors are doing their best, and I think they would do it. I don't have a judgment about that unless I thought End of the Tour did a pretty good job. The complaints that I've read online that people have, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see why you'd say that. I can kind of see both sides. I would like, I get why you would complain about that. But on the other hand, I'm like, it's in a different medium. So I can handle it. I would love to see Infinite Jest. I would love to read an Infinite Jest graphic novel.
Oh.
Yes, I would.
That would be amazing.
That could be a thing that definitely happens.
That could be easier than a movie, huh?
The community should beg for an Infinite Jest graphic novel. I think we would get one if we begged for it.
That's a great recommendation.
That's a great form that you can have.
And you can play with it in different styles and narration. Have you seen the online one where the dad and his son did Infinite Jest scenes with Legos?
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yes.
Like the fact that there's so much there's so much interpretive art trying to make sense of this book. It makes me think that in 100 years people might talk about it and like Moby Dick, I hope so. I don't know, who knows, but maybe it will,
Well, it's definitely, it's tapped into something, and it's structurally complex and revealing. It's like a new way of writing. I think part of the reason that people love Ulysses is there was a structural neatness, a structural puzzle that was new behind it. And I think that's why I love Moby Dick. There was this new, no one's ever put all this detail about whaling in the midst of fiction. What's going on here?
Right,
and there's this, the kind of innovative structural, I'm mispronouncing structural today. We'll have to, I'm going to say structural, and then you can edit this correct pronunciation back through my former mistakes. I think that's part of what will make it remembered.
And Wallace being such an interesting guy, how Kerouac, people look to him as a leader of the beats because his story and his image was, unique, right? And so, do you ever bring in any of his short stories into your classes as his professor?
What I've done, it's hard for do. I'm teaching theater classes, but my seniors, I have the senior capstone class. I have on a few occasions read "This Is Water" to them because it's a graduation speech.
Yeah.
I usually end up crying through part of it, but which is okay. Theater class, you can cry in theater class. It's totally normal. It's totally fine. In some classes, don't let me mislead what's going on. But sometimes I'll read that just to get that voice. And sometimes people are like, wow, it's profound. And sometimes people are like, what did you just read? It's kind of that thing, sometimes people it resonates with people and sometimes it doesn't. So it just, that's kind of haunted. There's people make fun of people perhaps like you and I get so excited about Wallace that it's like, oh God, I got to read this. And that irritates people. So there's this joke about people trying to force Wallace on people, which I think is part of the cliche that goes around with this. But I think, beyond that cliche, I had a teacher that talked about William Faulkner so much. I was thinking, I'll never read him in high school. But then you read him and it's like, oh, there's some great stuff under here. So it's just, don't believe the hype to get it back to the rap backgrounds. Decide for yourself instead of just trusting what people have said,
Yeah, there's he talks about there's the burden of proof in his legend, right? And in Infinite Jest, it has to be a great book because it's so big and so discussed. And so, like, as a teacher, you have to just lay these breadcrumbs and hope that people find Wallace on their own. And if it resonates with them, I'm sure it must be rewarding if they buy Elegant Complexity and want to talk to you about it. And
it's been a blessing. 12 years, and people have, people like you want to come talk to me. It's wonderful. It's a great thing that happens. So.
You have another book about his fiction or
Oblivion. I analyzed Oblivion, the stories in Oblivion.
Cool.
I
got to get that.
Yeah.
And
for anyone, if there are theater people, I have a new book on Edward Albee's plays that's out, all published by Sideshow Media Group Press.
Who do that? Well, one of the guys is involved with the podcast you were on, right?
Yeah. Matt Booker, John Booker is the publisher out in California, and his brother Matt lives in Austin and does the Great Concavity podcast and is the host of the Wallace L listserv and part of the David Foster Wallace International Society that published David Foster Wallace Journal now, one of the journals that's coming out.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Greg, where can our audience keep in touch with you or follow you or online?
Well, I really don't. I used to have an online presence, but I would just say if you have questions, and I told the Great Concavity podcast people they could do this too, just email me at g.carlisle@moreheadstate.edu. And if you have a question about Infinite Jest, I will loop around just as you've heard us doing here, and I'll give you some loops to explore if you have questions about the book.
That's awesome. So people you don't mind if they just email you?
No, you can email. I mean, if I'm grading papers, you may have to wait a couple of days, but eventually, usually I stop grading because I'm looking for an excuse to take a break and answer your question and then get back to what I was doing. So,
well, thank you, Greg. I was hoping after we get off there, if you're down to sign my Elegant Complexity, that would be a lot to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, any final thoughts to end with, or any? I don't know. I guess are you working on any upcoming books after?
I am. I'm taking a long break from writing. I'm trying to enjoy reading again now without thinking I have to comment on this now. So I'm catching up on a lot of comic books that I want to read. I'm about to get to direct Hamlet next year. So I'm very excited about that. And I should leave that alone till the summer, but I'm kind of tinkering around with that now because I'm so excited about it.
That's awesome. I'll send you. I have a Hamlet song that
Yes. It's not obviously not on the post CD.
I'm such a big Shakespeare fan too. So maybe next interview we can talk about our love for Shakespeare.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Yes, I love that.
Well, cool. Well, thank you, Greg. Really great to meet you, man. Thank you for your time. Too. Thank you. All right, cool. Greg Carlisle, ladies and gentlemen.
It was just after 4 in the afternoon when the badgers in the hills began to snooze as the mome ras cried and borogoves dreamed. Silently they slept as the Jabberwocky screamed. Wow, sounds like something was awry. Burbling it beckoned, I was straight up petrified. And the fish thought I waited, tossing, turning in my sleep. With my vorpal sword in hand, I heard the Jabberwocky creak.
Snicker snack went the blade as he gambled in the wave. Whipping through the weird wood, they misunderstood my ways. Yet my mouth was agape, I let out such a yell. But the reason for this belching was a branch that had fell. And it caught me on my noggin in a slippy kind of way. Made me frumious today, so they choose to run away. If they just give me a chance, look beneath my brook exterior, we'd have a frabjous day, but things are getting eerier.
Beware the Jabberwock,
beware the Jabberwocky,
beware the Jabberwock,
beware the Jabberwocky,
beware the Jabberwock,
beware the Jabberwocky,
with jaws that bite and claws that catch. Beware the Jabberwock,
beware the Jabberwocky,
beware the Jabberwock,
beware the Jabberwocky,
beware the Jabberwock,
beware the Jabberwocky,
with jaws that bite and claws that catch. Beware the Jabberwocky, he's known to catch a body with fangs that bite and chew you up if you've been acting naughty. Galumping through the forest, snicker snacking with his crew, cause the Jub bird is fuming and the bander snatches too. By the tum-tum tree, Jabberwock appeared with 47 teeth, black antennas for his ears. Eyes of flame, he howled at me, I struck him with my blade. Beamishly I chortled, MC Lars and saved the day.
They call me Max, I'm far from handsome and a foe of all that's perfect, but I mind my mimsy business, it's the rap I'm undeserving of. I told you would, I call my home as constant by heart, but there's a thread at every corner, so you learn to move smart. Spot a boy, true was rapping, guess my looks have got a threat. I verbal to him a simple question, don't you think you need protection? It's dangerous to go along galumping to an exit. In less than a second, my head is disconnected.
Beware the Jabberwock,
beware the Jabberwocky,
beware the Jabberwock,
beware the Jabberwocky,
beware the Jabberwock,
beware the Jabberwocky,
with jaws that bite and claws that catch. Beware the Jabberwock,
beware the Jabberwocky,
beware the Jabberwock,
beware the Jabberwocky,
beware the Jabberwock,
beware the Jabberwocky,
with jaws that bite and claws that catch.
All right. Now you know everything there is to know about Infinite Jest. Now you got to go read the book. If you're able to get through the podcast and follow everything we're talking about, you'll have no problem reading the book. So thank you, Greg. That was awesome. Next week, we have Perry Grip of Nerf Herder. We had a Marcella Vignali won an Academy Award for animating the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Perry Grip is an Emmy winner. So we only have awesome people on this podcast. Perry Grip co-wrote Guitar Hero song, and he does great solo work. I've played with Nerf Herder a lot. Just an incredible guy. So that is next week. Until then, have a great week. Come see us in the UK for tour dates and all that flavor. nerdcoretour.com. Peace. Bye.